made for entertainment purposes. Any and all serious accusations are merely speculation or alleged based on publicly available information. All footage of the Steve Wilkos Show will be edited for fair use. All things presented in this video are subjective to this opinion piece and not meant as a definitive analysis of the truth. Please do your own research and please don't sue me.
I'm the magic man. I got the flash, I got the cash, and I'm gonna snatch your back.
You're a liar. You don't even my life.
Daryl, you are not.
Welcome to Trash TV, an untamed underground of satellite television popular amongst stay-at-home moms, divorcees, and the disenfranchised. If you've watched other commentary content creators of the white or male variant, then you have seen some videos analyzing this content before. Videos on shows like Maury, or Jerry Springer, or Jeremy Kyle, if you're on the British setting.
Am I off now?
You are.
Is that the end of the show?
Get off, Carl. Go on. Go on. Where's security? Go on, get him out of here.
I grew up on woman-orientated talk shows playing in the background whilst my mom folded laundry on the couch. But as I got older into my early teen years and became more uninterested in actually going outside, I find myself occasionally having Maury in the background as I was doodling in my room. Because although I was privileged enough to have a TV in my bedroom, I was still somehow poor enough to only have a box satellite with like 10 channels on it. And it was a toss-up between either Trash TV or Ghost Whisperer on Ion Television.
Ion Television. Positively entertaining.
I've enjoyed watching these retrospectives from creators like Jarvis Johnson. That one Jerry Springer video from Leon Lush is also pretty well done, and this video by Doplex that goes over the history of this subcategory of television. If you want like an in-depth overview of trash TV and its history and relevance in media and entertainment, then I would highly suggest watching that video because this one will take reference to that video. I'm not going to take a complete deep dive in the whole of the matter. Rather, I want to zero in on one show in particular. And it's a show that, when this topic of like tabloid entertainment is brought up, no one, and I mean no one, has ever really talked about it. And I'm really not sure why, because in my opinion, this one is one of the worst. As I mentioned before, other commentary channels have labeled other shows as the worst of trash TV. Immediately, what would come to mind when you're thinking of the worst one is Jerry Springer and Maury. And like, sure, those shows are insane and lasted for decades, despite its problematic nature that doesn't really hold up today.
You're born a boy, all right? That's all good. You want to be a female. That's all good. What are you using your to get somebody pregnant for?
I'm a white person. In the skin?
I don't want to blow you away here, but the truth is that probably a whole bunch of white people that haven't joined Gordon and the Klan.
Regardless, I still think that this one stands above those two, especially since, unlike Maury and Jerry Springer, this one is still going. For me, this is the worst of trash TV. It doesn't even come close. And yet, despite how bad this particular show is, I don't see anyone touching on it. Maybe it's a copyright thing, maybe it's a risk to the algorithm, or maybe it's because this man is scary looking and no one wants to mess with him. But in my honest opinion, the Steve Wilkos Show is one of the worst shows on tabloid TV. And to emphasize this, I want to start by telling you the story of Anca Pennington. On December 11th, 2019, an episode of The Steve Wilkos Show was recorded with guest Anca Pennington, her ex-boyfriend, and his new partner. This episode doesn't appear to be in distribution anymore, but snippets of the episode can still be found in this promotional video. We see here that Steve Wilkos is screaming at Anca for burning her child. So the story goes that Anca herself actually wrote into the show after finding strange circular welts on her infant daughter's leg. Anca called CPS, documented the injuries, and suspected that her child's father and new girlfriend were abusing the infant and burning cigarettes on her legs. After contacting Children and Family Services, Anca was left with zero answers as to what the state of her investigation was. So, being impatient and feeling ignored by service providers, Anca's next course of action was to contact the Steve Wilkos show. All of the suspects in question were brought onto the show that very week. Now, before her appearance, Anca was actually a fan of the Steve Wilkos show and believed that everything that she saw was the real deal. Anca recalled in an interview that when she saw the injuries on her daughter's leg, she was in complete hysterics, trying to use everything at her disposal to get justice for her daughter.
When I saw the marks, I went crazy. I really did. I was like, what is this? At first I thought it was cat bites because it was a cat hair in the diaper bag. And then I called CPS that day. I wasn't getting answers. I was very emotional. I went around my neighborhood, asked what do you guys think this is? And I had friends that were like, oh my gosh, you could look like cigarette burns. And when you hear that, I'm going into, I can't even explain to you. So then I call CPS. CPS comes and checks the baby out at daycare. A couple weeks go by and they're not giving me answers. She did not tell me to take the baby to a doctor. I kind of just was waiting for her to give me some advice. So I have watched Steve Wilkos all my life. I never questioned polygraphs. I thought that his show was real. Because you see the reactions. It's like, oh my gosh, people are going to jail?
Exactly.
I didn't question. So I called them, and then I didn't get an answer. About a day or two later, I wrote them.
And after not getting any answers or instructions from CPS as to what to do next, she wrote a letter to the show as a last resort. Herself, her ex, and the new girlfriend all took polygraph tests, and the results of the test came back, and Anca had failed. The ex and the new girlfriend passed their polygraphs. Anca took 3 lie detector tests and failed all 3 of them. The show's investigation, I'm putting that in massive quotation marks, concluded that it was Anca who abused her children, threw the blame on her ex, and tried to lambaste him on national television. But it seemingly backfired, as the polygraph revealed she was the monster the whole time. It was reported that Anca's episode ends with Steve yelling in her face, telling her that she was a horrible parent who abused her child, and that she was going to go to jail and never see her children ever again, with the crowd booing her off the stage. After her experience on the show, on the way back to Nebraska, Anca went into the airport bathroom, took 3 bottles of Tylenol, and attempted suicide. Fortunately, before she could slip out of consciousness, she called 911 and asked for help. Anca nearly escaped full liver failure and had to spend a week in the hospital under suicide watch. Now, you might be hearing this story and thinking that there's nothing inherently wrong going on here. I mean, it is tragic that a person would attempt to take their own life, but at the same time, they abused their children. This is a child abuser. Why would we care about her personal well-being when she hurt her children? And look, I understand that sentiment, but the problem is, it was a lie. Not the suicide thing. That definitely happened. But the entire episode was built entirely on a fabrication. The polygraph results were not accurate. Anca didn't abuse her children. In fact, no one did. Not the ex-partner, not the new girlfriend, not even Anca herself. No one abused this child because they were never burned to begin with. When Anca was in the hospital recovering from her suicide attempt, she showed pictures of the injuries on her daughter's leg, and the nurse overseeing Anca as a patient identified the welts consistent with a ringworm infection. Later in December, weeks after taping Anca's episode, ringworm was officially diagnosed as the cause of the injuries. It turns out that a week before appearing on the show, the Children and Family Services in Omaha had actually concluded their investigation. The specialist overseeing her case, Nicole Powers, reported that based on the information obtained during this investigation, it has been determined that the allegations will be listed as unfounded. Anca would not get this notice of her CPS investigation closing until after she got out of the hospital for her suicide attempt. The Steve Wilkos team later wrote to Anca a follow-up on the episode's development, with plans to still air the episode in February of 2020. Now, I understand, to an extent, Steve's reaction and the team's insistence on airing this episode and showing it as is, given the information that the polygraph test concluded on. However, this information about the ringworm infection was confirmed whilst the raw footage was still on the cutting room floor. During that time span, it wouldn't be unreasonable for the team to perhaps scrap the entire thing, knowing that these burns weren't actually burns at all. Also, the foundation of this show is made up of a staff that are seemingly ex-cop or have had experience in this sort of investigative work, bringing people who abuse their children to justice. However, no one on this show can apparently tell the difference between a ringworm infection and cigarette burns. This ex-cop host who has overseen over 2,000 episodes, who yells and screams at people for abusing their children, apparently can't tell the difference between a cigarette burn and ringworm? I just don't think that's possible. I mean, granted, ringworm and cigarette burns do look very similar looking, so, give benefit of the doubt. Maybe they really didn't know. Which leads me to my next point. Anca brings up in this same interview that Child and Family Services never advised her to get a doctor's follow-up to confirm that these are cigarette burns. And it's like, I'm sorry, but if I were a CPS worker and I was given a case of someone calling in reporting that their child was abused, I would immediately request for a doctor's note or medical intervention to find that these injuries are consistent with abuse. If I can confirm that injuries sustained by a child are not consistent with abuse, then I don't have to waste the time, the resources, or the taxpayer money. You know what I mean? It just feels like at every level, these people failed this woman. But that's pretty much standard practice for Stephen John Wilkos' full legal name. Hey, speaking of which, since we're talking about this guy's show a lot, we should probably figure out who he actually is. Meet Steve Wilkos, aka my sleep paralysis demon. Host of the show named after himself, Steve is a former Chicago police officer and U.S. Marine who worked within the system up until 2002. Before making a name for himself on television, Steve grew up in Chicago with his father also working as a police officer. Seemingly inspired by what his dad did for work, Steve would also become a police officer after serving in South Korea and Japan as a Marine fresh out of high school. It was on one fateful day in 1994, while Steve was patrolling at his usual station spot at Logan Square, where he got a strange new business offer. Producers for the Jerry Springer Show needed security guards, and at the time, Springer was being taped and produced in Chicago. So, to save in having to invest in their own security team, the company behind Springer's production would rely on the Chicago PD.
These guys are all here, they're all here to do their job. They're all policemen. And when they see somebody abusing somebody, they step in.
The team picked up on Wilkos and other off-duty police officers. They worked on set part-time up until 2002, when Wilkos would dedicate his time fully to Jerry Springer and leave police work. Now, reality TV gave Steve an opportunity that police work really wouldn't give him, that being a notable name that is synonymous with fame and privilege. What I mean by this is being a cop meant being a public servant that risked his life to protect citizens and enforce the law. But a reality show meant that he can be a trusted protector in front of an audience of millions of people. It's one thing to be an officer that serves the public, but it's another thing to be a household name officer. But Steve was still just a security guard, only really meant to be a background employee that stayed out of the view of the cameras, only really getting in the spotlight when guests on Jerry Springer became too aggressive or the crowd was getting too rowdy. But all of that would change around the early 2000s. Jerry Springer would occasionally hire Steve as a temporary step-in host for the Jerry Springer Show when Jerry was either sick or had an obligation outside of production, such as hosting for Dancing with the Stars. The relationship between Jerry and Steve would be similar to that of, say, Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Phil. One simply cannot exist without the other. Wilkos was becoming very influential on Jerry's production team, becoming the head director of security and even having his own segment on Jerry Springer called Steve to the Rescue. Wilkos may not have been the power vacuum that was Jerry himself, but he was an essential part of the mechanism of the show. The only reason Steve Wilkos would end up getting his own show later on was because of the recognition and recommendation from Jerry Springer. The same way that Dr. Phil got his own program from being a featured guest on the Oprah Winfrey Show. These two titans of television, both talk and trash TV, gave way for their underlings to get their own time slot. And it wasn't just Jerry that boosted Steve's connections. It was also Maury Povich, who not only featured Steve as a guest, but also a stand-in host as well. People like to view like Maury and Jerry Springer as like two separate entities, but in reality, this whole thing is like a massive spider web where everyone is connected to everybody. And the one thing that connects Jerry and Maury was Steve. And I mean, it does make sense considering that at one point, Maury and Jerry Springer were being filmed at the same location, which definitely explains why the later edition of the Steve Wilkos Show would sort of be a hybrid of both Jerry Springer and Maury combined.
Virtually anyone could do what I do, which is to basically say three things. You did what? Come on out. We'll be right back. You practice that and you'll be hosting your own show in no time.
You know what? This is a talk show, and I come and I do my job, but I hear stories like this, and I start boiling inside. Are you telling me that's the reason why? Was your 19-month-old walking on 2 feet then? No, it was 9 months old. 9 months old. And you know what I'd like to do? I'd like to do that for you.
When I say that this show was a combination of these two shows, I am not even kidding. Steve Wilkos was essentially the love child of these two, albeit not as crazy as Jerry Springer and far more serious in tone as, say, Maury. I think what did separate these three, despite essentially being the same show, is more so the tone of each show. Jerry Springer was just utter nonsense, from on-stage fights to random background entertainment, such as plate spinners, strippers, horses, boobs, fights in the crowd, breakdancing, random references to other game shows, and mud wrestling, because of course. The format of Jerry Springer was to have the main focus quarrel front and center on stage, whilst whatever random shit was happening in the background. And this was going on at the same time, which resulted in the most totally normal thing on television, we swear. Maury still has a craziness to it, with its guests having insane on-stage personalities and reactions of the crowd. But it took a more serious tone, with its main focus being on paternity and extramarital affairs. Steve decided to take the serious topics of Maury and up that up to 11, and the insanity of Jerry Springer, and just keep most of the explosiveness to come from mainly the guest or Steve himself. Steve Wilkos is a show that deals with entirely different subject matter that should be handled with more delicacy than, say, maybe a paternity test or cheating, and instead pairs it with Steve Wilkos throwing a chair and nearly breaking the set every episode.
What is wrong with you?
This format still continues to be successful, mainly due to the open hostility and social shunning that comes with abusing children, or being a kitty diddler, or a literal fucking murderer. You know how victims of horrible abuse and trauma will have this innate feeling or desire to want to hurt their abusers? You know, cuss them out, make them feel small and weak, and no longer have this power over them. Well, that's the kind of emotional response that Steve Wilkos is trying to get out of his show, making monsters look small by throwing them up against a wall and screaming in their face. It's actually very similar to tactics used by predator hunting YouTubers such as Lyle Convoy or Mama Max. Really, watching a Mama Max video is a more highly produced, overly dramatic, and violent version of what I imagine Steve wants to do to most of his guests.
I want to kiss with a baseball bat.
In instigation work, intimidation is a huge part of getting answers. The term good cop, bad cop is a real thing. It's an interrogation strategy. And Steve, being a former cop, plays the role of both when confronting child abusers, deadbeat parents, child molesters, rapists, and predatory people on his show. One day, I swear, I'm going to make a video that doesn't mention any of these things. My soul can't take it anymore. And there can be a catharsis in watching shitty, abusive people facing a hard truth. Sometimes a painful truth of what happens when you're outed on the Steve Wilkos show. Sometimes it's nice to see a piece of shit being called out for being a piece of shit. I mean, most of commentary YouTube is just a bunch of dudes calling out people for being shitty and calling them every name under the sun. But is this actually productive? Does this actually help in getting justice for people who were wronged? And if this is ultimately meant to be some sort of reality talk show, how much of it is really real? Well, with Steve Wilkos, it's sort of hard to say, really. It's very apparent when you watch Maury or Jerry Springer that these conflicts are being played up for entertainment. I mean, that's no secret. Most of these guests aren't actors, so when they try and act up on stage how mad and crazy they are, it's mostly a hit or miss. But with this show, over 50 real investigations were conducted. Some of these guests did go to prison for some of the things they were accused of on this show. And given that this show has over 2,200 episodes, 50 investigations is impressively low. Like, 50 investigations in comparison to over 2,200 episodes, which sometimes features like 2 to 3 cases at a time, meaning at max per episode there's at least 6 people guest starring at all times. And yet, despite the over 10,000 some guests that Steve has spoken to, this has only led to 50 investigations? I mean, granted, like, not every episode is gonna cover like something illegal, but it's very often the subject of child abuse and sex crimes are the episodes that bring in the most viewership, and really is what the whole show is kind of well known for. When you think of Jerry Springer, you think of two randos airing out their feud to everyone, and when you think of Maury, it's paternity test, and when you think of Steve Wilkos, you think of the dude that yells at a pedophile or a child abuser for half an hour. And like, I need y'all to understand this, right? Like, the things these guests are getting accused of or confronted for, these are real crimes, real felonies that carry life sentences sometimes. And you only clocked 50 of these motherfuckers out of the thousands of guests? That leaves like a 0.5% arrest rate on a show dedicated to accusing people of a federal crime. But that doesn't really matter because this is trash TV, which means that inherently whatever happens on this show is probably fake. And that's kind of a problem. It's one thing for Jerry to fake like a friend quarrel or some dating drama whatever. It's just making shit up because people love drama. It's another thing to fake a paternity test. Like, that's a little more scummy because paternities are like a real social tragedy and trauma for a lot of people, especially those who grew up in a one-parent household and never met the other. That feels a little more exploitive, but then again, it's playing off of a more humbling formula of giving people a desired outcome, which is to know the truth about where you come from. But it is an entirely new ballpark to falsely accuse people of serious crimes of this nature. That is why this show, for me, is one of the worst. And Anca is just one of many incidents of serious crimes like this being played up as drama for a camera. There's far more like it, and the truth of the matter is, it is far worse than you could ever imagine. So about 12 years ago, a former anonymous user on r/IAmA was claiming to be a former employee on the Steve Wilkos show. In the replies, many were asking specifically about the guest on the show with convictions of serious crimes, and the original poster answers. The show is technically considered entertainment, and the only proof we have of their guilt is the lie detector results. Both entertainment and lie detectors do not stand up in a court of law. It is up to the accuser, the child's mom, etc., to pursue the matter on their own. Now, of course, this is Reddit. It's not like the source of all things truth and definite, right? Like, for all I know, this guy could totally be lying about his identity. But what I find interesting is, although he says that the lie detectors don't convict any guest on the show is still 100% real. And herein lies the problem, because lie detectors have no basis in science. I know, like, grand hot take of this video, but lie detector tests are bullshit. In fact, a lot of lie detector results are thrown out of court evidence because the court does not recognize lie detection as proof of guilt. As this employee states, the lie detector results and entertainment are not reliable submissions in court. And even if lie detectors were submittable theoretically, let's just argue that they would be, the Steve Wilkos show is absolutely not the place to be conducting a lie detector test. According to a dedicated article done on lie detectors from Lie Detector Test United Kingdom, there are many factors that can contaminate the results of a lie detector test, and those being drugs or medication, specifically medication made to combat mental illnesses like extreme depression or anxiety, unprofessional examiners, keep that one in the back of your head because we're going to get back to it, and the environment that the test is taking place in. And I'm sure that you would all agree that taking a lie detector test on the same set of a TV show that millions of people watch, and which includes a lot of fighting and screaming, would obviously affect the results of that test. Especially since, at this point, Wilkos, Maury, and Jerry Springer are all recording their show at the same location. So it's not just the Steve Wilkos set that would affect these results, but the other two extremely loud sets literally next door. Not only that, but lie detector test is technically a misleading term because the actual term is polygraph test, which examines a person's physiological reactions to questions being asked of them. And if all it takes to prove that you're a liar is having a different physiological reaction in comparison to when you're telling the truth and when you're telling a lie, then all you have to do is train yourself to have the same physiological reaction to when you're telling a truth and a lie. A lot of sociopaths and psychopaths are able to do this, and that's why another deterrent that can affect the results of a lie detector is mental illness. And it's not just mental illnesses, but physical brain injuries and serious physical disabilities like epilepsy, COPD, asthma, and even multiple sclerosis can affect the results of a lie detector. And considering that each and every single one of us is suffering with some form of physical or mental disability, that means that there is probably not a single person in existence that can take an accurate polygraph. Pretty much every mental and physical condition can affect how a polygraph reads. And without this this polygraph having this preconceived data to show your standard state of being factual and truthful, whilst also having anxiety or depression or asthma or whatever, it's gonna pick up these irregularities as lies because a lie detector's truth is based on a completely healthy person, and it doesn't accommodate for someone who isn't. Hell, there are former polygraph examiners who have been reading and conducting polygraphs for literal years, who train others on how to beat a polygraph test. I even found a cop on YouTube that knows how to beat one. Like, cops know these things are bullshit. I mean, these things are banned in 30 states. So that really begs the question, why do 23 states still consider polygraph tests admissible in court? Why is it being used on a talk show ran by an ex-cop who comes from Chicago, Illinois, where in Illinois it is prohibited to subject a suspect to a polygraph at all? Well, to answer this question, we have to look at it from two different perspectives, because although the Steve Wilkos show and the system have similar reasons as to why they provide polygraph tests, the context is completely different. The police still use them because it's an intimidation tool. I mean, think about it. If you agree to a polygraph test and you fail, then obviously your emotions are going to be more heightened when getting accused of something you may or may not have done. But then you got this confusing line chart that you don't know how it works and you don't know how to read it, clocking you in as being deceptive. So now the police are going to interrogate you again, only this time they already have the preconceived notion that you're a liar based on this confusing line chart. When before you took the test, they were trying to hear you out and assume you innocent until proven guilty. But now they have this freaky little line thing going on, giving them enough reason to treat you like you're guilty until proven innocent. It's meant to scare you. It's meant to give the police answers that they want to hear, rather than actually getting the truth and getting real justice. As for Wilkos, though, it's relatively the same reasons with the added twist of entertainment. If you've ever watched an episode of the Steve Wilkos show, or Maury since they also provide polygraph tests, then there is this sort of suspense being built up, and the loud and over-the-top reactions from the crowd and the guest finding out whether they are passing their polygraphs or not. It's great for TV, it's fantastic for views, it hooks people in to get that grand reveal when you tease it in the first 5 minutes and then reveal in the final 3. And now that you know all of these factors, let's go back to the beginning. So Anca took 3 lie detector tests and failed miserably. But given the type of environment that this show is, the potential that Anca had some sort of mental illness perhaps, or even disabilities that are not visible but could very well be apparent. And what about the fact that the reactions to a failed test is really what brings in the most views and attention and ratings and money? Would it not be possible that the show intentionally lied about the results to make a television moment clippable for YouTube even? Now, I do believe that it is possible that Anca failed her test, because lie detectors are bullshit and they don't work anyways. And this environment is absolutely not the place to be conducting a lie detector test, like, let's be for real. But let's argue the slim chance that Anca passed along with her ex and his girlfriend. Let's say that the results were all accurate and did portray the actual facts and truth of the situation. Let's play this episode again.
All right, Anca, we made you take a polygraph. We made your ex here take a polygraph. And we made his girlfriend take a polygraph. And the results are in. All right, Anca, we asked you if you had ever burned your children. You said no. We also asked if you know who did. You said no. These questions were also asked to your ex-husband and his partner. The lie detector has determined that your ex passed with flying colors. He was telling the truth. The lie detector also determined that his girlfriend was also telling the truth. And as for you, Miss Anca, the lie detector test determined that you were also telling the truth. So we'll be right back after this commercial break.
That would be boring, wouldn't it? The purpose of this show is holding someone accountable. So if everyone featured as a guest didn't actually do anything wrong, then no one can be held accountable. Which means no one is booed off stage and gets to be the bad guy of the episode. No one gets yelled at and screamed at by Steve Wilkos, which makes the show boring. But let's just argue that Anca did actually fail her polygraph. Maybe her child's ringworm diagnosis was just all made up to attack the credibility of the show. Maybe she deserved everything she got from her appearance on Steve Wilkos. Okay. So can you explain this guy then? This is Jesse Wayne Perkins. Jesse was a guest on the 12th season of the Steve Wilkos Show, accused of killing his girlfriend's 15-month-old daughter, Carolina Rose Dodd. Jesse's girlfriend, Amanda, found her daughter dead, lying face down in her crib. Amanda worked 2 jobs, and in between jobs would nap up to be fully rested for her other job later that day. It was only after her nap did she realize that her daughter was dead. Whilst working her first job, Jessie was home alone with baby Carolina, and when mom came home, she checked in on her baby, and Jessie let her know that she was just put down for a nap. By the time that Amanda discovered that her child was dead, Jessie had already left. On November 14th, 2019, 2 months after Carolina's death, Jesse appeared on the Steve Wilkos Show. And at first, he was a little standoffish, refusing to take the polygraph. After Amanda threatens to break up with Jesse, he finally agrees to take the test. And to the shock of everyone, he passed.
The results came back the same to each question, and they came back that Jesse told the truth.
He was asked if he knew who caused Carolina's death or if he was responsible for it. He answered no to both, and the lie detector determined he told the truth. Or did he? On May 20th, 2021, an article was released. Prosecutor, 15-month-old girl smothered to death when she wouldn't stop crying after being burned by a cigarette. The article goes on to talk about the day that Carolina died via the confession of Jesse Wayne Perkins, who pled guilty at Forsyth's Superior Court. This is how that morning went according to Jesse. Jesse had only been dating Amanda at that point for about a few months, and Amanda was working 2 jobs to sustain herself and her daughter without the father's support. Amanda had entrusted Jesse to watch over baby Carolina, a mistake she will regret for the rest of her life. Baby Carolina was just learning how to walk when she injured herself with a cigarette that she ran into that Jesse was smoking in the apartment at the time. So naturally, being burned by a cigarette, baby Carolina started crying and wouldn't cease crying no matter the efforts of Jesse. Eventually, Jesse was so fed up with the crying, he snapped and smothered Carolina with a pillow. When she fully lost consciousness, Jesse placed her in her crib in an attempt to make it look like she was sleeping. Now, before this incident, Carolina had a reported history of being referred to CPS before the incident that took her life. Doctors noted in her autopsy report that she had injuries that suspected potential child neglect. A skeletal scan indicated nothing, however, a follow-up appointment with her pediatrician led to concerns that compelled the doctor to call CPS once again. Further evidence of her neglect in Jesse's care was an incident where baby Carolina fell down a flight of stairs. She was found with facial bruises from a potential beating, and she even had to be evaluated for potential sexual abuse. Although, just to make it perfectly clear, this is completely unrelated to Jesse, and it was a completely separate incident. Jesse had nothing to do with that particular part of the CPS investigation, and ultimately it concluded that the allegations were unfounded. And I mean, look, it is one thing to falsify someone abusing a child, but it is a totally other thing to vindicate a literal child murderer. That is a fuck up that could only possibly happen with a faulty polygraph. Or perhaps lie detector tests are bullshit, and the show knows that. But remember, this show cannot be used as an admission of guilt or a form of evidence when opening an investigation and getting someone prosecuted for a crime. The guests afterwards have to proceed with that all by themselves. But what would happen if this show vindicated a guilty person? The other guests will have no need to look into this person any further and won't proceed with prosecuting them because the polygraph results indicated that they were innocent. And for a while, that's what happened with Amanda. She believed Jesse. She didn't look any further into him beyond what she was told on the show. And that really sucks. And believe it or not, this isn't the only time a murderer was found innocent on this show. This is Kandie Alisha Meinhart. She was on season 14 of the Steve Wilkos show, which taped and aired in 2021. Kandie went on the show after the death of her daughter, Alisha Thomas. Alisha lived with her mother and her boyfriend, Maurice Chester Eugene Davis. On the morning of June 20th, 2021, a frantic 911 call was made by Kandie with her boyfriend in the background of the call, reporting that the 18-month-old was suffering with cardiac arrest. When the police arrived, Alisha was purple and already showing signs of rigor mortis. A neighbor was questioned by police at the scene, and they reported overhearing Kandie on the phone with Alisha's biological father, and is quoted in saying, "Your bitch is dead." An autopsy concluded that Alisha suffered blunt force trauma to her body, which resulted in lacerations to her liver, renal glands, and bowel vessels. Alisha died from internal bleeding consistent with her injuries sustained after being beaten to death. The autopsy also revealed that Alisha actually died around 7 a.m. The police call was made at 11 a.m. They waited hours before finally making the call to police. Kandie made her appearance on the Steve Wilkos show in person, whilst the father of Alisha, Anthony Thomas, was on a TV, broadcasted elsewhere, and wasn't in the studio. Now, Maurice isn't the father of Alisha, but he was also arrested and is awaiting trial for her beating death. He never went on the Steve Wilkos show. After taking her polygraph test, Kandie's results were read aloud for Anthony to hear. Kandie was asked if she knew how her daughter died or if she had anything to do with it. She answered no to both.
And it came back that Kandie told the truth.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, please, tell your family, leave me the hell alone.
Now, admittedly, a lot of these stories are being reported by an anti-polygraph news site, right? Which is dedicated to exposing polygraphs as a falsehood. And although this might be biased against polygraph tests, these mugshots are real. These kids are actually dead. And these people are in prison right now as we speak. Perhaps it's just an unfortunate coincidence that two people, two murderers, would use this show as a way to prove their innocence when they never were. And maybe Steve Wilkos doesn't have as much power or influence to sway convictions and prosecute anyone, really. I mean, it's entertainment. And as previously stated with the employee on Reddit, an entertainment show cannot be admissible in court. These families, after having their lives ruined already and then airing out their trauma on live television, aren't even assisted by this show to get any legal action. That is a whole other trauma that they have to deal with on their own. Although the accommodations of transport and compensation for signing the contracts to be on the Steve Wilkos show is all financially covered by the show, actually getting legal conviction is apparently beyond what the show does. And sure, this is just a production team. It's technically none of their business to push for any of this. But I mean, maybe an organization or legal advisory or something. Anything would be better than just yelling these people to tears for 30 minutes. But whatever, right? Who cares, right? Who gives a shit? Steve cannot reasonably file every single case of abuse that comes on his show. He can't provide raw footage as a confessional or anything because he's no longer a cop. He's just a dude on a talk show. A highly edited, potentially highly scripted talk show. It would be stupid to take this show and utilize it to get any real convictions. despite on the official website for the Steve Wilkos show claiming that they have opened 50 real investigations. And it's not stating anywhere if those investigations actually led to any real convictions or anything. They just say that the show opened these 50 investigations. In fact, if you were to actually look up how many convictions were made from the Steve Wilkos show, pushing these guests to seek criminal prosecution, there are only 4 listed episodes that led to any real legal consequences. And even then, the cases do not cite the Steve Wilkos show or the lie detector test at all because they can't. But hey, the guy is still just some ex-cop that's exposing these horrible people. How is that a terrible thing? It's not. Inherently. But it's not really a credible or trustworthy expose when their polygraph technician is a racist piece of human garbage. Meet Dan Ribacoff. He is a celebrity polygraph technician, and what makes him different from just some regular polygraph technician is that he has the recognition and notoriety of the Steve Wilkos show. But also, Ribacoff's family business held a contract with the New York Metropolitan Transit Authority Police Department, which is a section of police that's oversight is under the NYPD. Dan Ribacoff was also featured on Impractical Jokers, his own show called The Lie Detective, and the Tyra Banks show like that one time. So this guy has over 20 years of polygraph experience, his own private eye that works with the NYPD, which is one of the largest police forces in the United States, and has worked on Steve Wilkos for over 14 years. What could possibly go wrong?
You need to leave!
Okay then. You see, Dan had a problem. In October of 2021, this anti-polygraph news org was able to obtain some racist text messages sent by Dan. And while intended to be just jokes, the texts are... well, an image with the caption, "When your GPS says, turn right onto Martin Luther King Boulevard," depicting locking your car doors, raising windows, and loading a revolver. Now listen, I don't know if it's just because I'm one of these, right? But like, I don't really, I don't get what the joke is. I don't understand. When you can't carry a gun because of a felony, but you found a loophole, and it's a guy strapped to a black guy via a baby vest. You know, indicating that black people are violent. Fun. And, of course, a humorous one, if said by a black person, but when sent by a white guy, it really sends a shock to your soul. You've heard of Elf on a Shelf? Now get ready for... I'm not gonna say anything. I think the image just kind of speaks for itself. When you've got $9.34 left in your bank account and you have to start practicing being homeless. Okay, I don't know if I would necessarily say that this is like directly racist because, look, it could be a white dude in this box, and in this economy, this would still apply. An image of a black Monopoly board where every square reads "Go to jail." I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing because it's just so absurd. It's so absurd. Like, what the fuck? The United States is third in murders throughout the world. But if you discount Chicago, Detroit, Washington, and New Orleans, the United States drops to 4th from the bottom of the same list. Coincidentally, these 4 cities also have the toughest gun laws in the United States. A fact check on this one here. This isn't even true. The states with the most lax gun laws have the most gun-related deaths. Because that makes sense. Underneath this sent meme is a message from Dan directly commentating on the sent message. And he says, what do those 4 cities have in common? A high concentration of ratchet... So I'm not going to say the word because I looked it up. And apparently it's a Yiddish slur for a black person. Oh, but it wasn't just black people that Ribacoff made racist remarks about. Here is an image of Donald Trump placing his hand in some hole in a wall with the caption, "No, this is no good. you could fit a Mexican child in here. I'm never doing a Trump impression again, I'm so sorry. I think the thing that's like really funny about this one is just the image of Trump wearing a yarmulke. I don't know why, just the thought of that makes me giggle. Elmo tells a local... My God, I am not saying that his neighborhood used to be nice before his kind showed up. Come on, dude, what the fuck? Big Bird attempts to kidnap a small black child, hoping that he can pass it off.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
And sell it to the traveling circus in town. Why you gotta do Sesame Street so dirty? Dude, not my boy Big Bird. How dare you? When asked about these text messages and their validity, Ribacoff claims to have no memory of sending them. Maybe he should take his own damn tag. Now listen, I am not going to hang you by the rafters and hope that crows eat away at your flesh because you sent or liked or laughed at a racist joke. Comedy is subjective. That's kind of the whole point of having different forms of it. There's many different ways you can make a joke. However, let's put this in a different context for just a second. So Dan works on a show whose guests are primarily people of color and whose viewership is mostly lower class folks who can only afford trash TV channels through those like satellite boxes. You know what I'm talking about? 30% of the lower class consist of Hispanics, whilst 22% are African American. A massive portion of Maury's own success comes from a viewership and guest list of primarily African Americans. And the same can be said with the Steve Wilkos show. So on top of having families of color air out their dirty laundry live on television and tear their familial foundations in front of millions of people, they also have to put up with a polygraph technician that shares racist memes about how violent they are and how cities dominated with their populace is dangerous and full of crime. So yeah, that's not a good fucking look, especially calling them that in private. Like, bro, you are cooked. But who cares, right? This shit was back in 2017. It was a private conversation from years ago, right? Like, womp womp, who cares? What's the big deal? Well, the big deal is this lawsuit that Dan and his company were involved with. Now, I'm gonna go over the details of this lawsuit, but I do need to emphasize this again, like I did in the beginning of the video. Everything I'm about to present are just allegations. I am simply reporting on what is being said in legal paperwork that is publicly available. I am not stating whether these things are true or false. I am just reporting on what is being read in papers. So back in 2020, plaintiff Suzanne Goldsmith and her lawyers filed a $50 million lawsuit against Dan, his daughter Lisa, and his son, Lance Ribacoff. Like I said, this is a family business. So Suzanne never actually worked or requested services from the Ribacoffs, but her high-profile husband, David Smith, hired the private eye back when Suzanne and David were going through a divorce. Eventually, the couple settled their differences and reconciled to file this lawsuit together. She and her husband alleges is that this family-ran private eye failed to report on sexual misconduct, overcharged customers, and allegedly aided in rapes within their company being the International Investigative Group, or the IIG. The Ribacoffs conducted and engaged in a toxic work environment that not only overcharged customers, but also engrossed in misconduct, which included inappropriate relationships with Suzanne's friends and family, frequenting strip clubs, soliciting prostitutes, using illegal drugs, and consuming hard liquor whilst on duty. But the worst of all of the allegations was what occurred in 2018. You see, this isn't the first time that Suzanne had tried to sue. She actually filed a lawsuit once before. Her first lawsuit was actually dropped because Suzanne was raped by an IIG investigator and NYPD detective, Yanti Mike Green, aka Michael Cruz. According to recovered text message data from Green's iCloud, Dan Ribacoff would tell Green and other IIG detectives to bill for an extended amount of hours that they weren't even on the clock for. So when Suzanne tried to bring to light this misconduct within the company before, text messages between Dan and Yanti authorized Green to, quote-unquote, shut down Suzanne's lawsuit. And Green did this by drugging Suzanne, raping her, and recording everything on camera to use this sexual assault as blackmail to stop her from pursuing the lawsuit. To quote what Suzanne has to say about this terrible event, "This was one of the most traumatic experiences I have ever endured. It was already a challenging time in my life, and IIG and their investigators exploited the power dynamic they had over me during the investigation. I was powerless, and after I was raped and sexually assaulted by these investigators, I lived in a constant state of fear. They made it clear that there would be repercussions if I ever exposed what they were doing. I'll have to live with that threat, and the emotional toll this has taken on me for the rest of my life." But here's the wildest part about this lawsuit that I found both the most compelling and the most hilarious. And listen, none of what happened to Suzanne is funny. I'm not saying that this part is funny, but this right here, this is peak. So, apparently, you know how the Ribacoffs have like really high profile clients, right? You know, like celebrities, higher class folks that would go to the IIG and utilize their detective work. You know, because outside of like polygraphs, the Ribacoffs were like a private eye. They were like real detectives that were recognized by the NYPD, right? So, one of their famed clients that they allegedly overcharged was the Church of Scientology. No, I am not kidding. The Church of Scientology hired the Ribacoffs to investigate and get surveillance on Leah Remini when she started speaking up against the Church of Scientology, and also making her documentary exposing Scientology. The Ribacoffs were basically hired to get any and all dirt to use against Leah and stalk her, basically to figure out like how much secret information that she knew and was planning to expose to the public. The detectives even acknowledged while working with the church that they wanted Leah dead at some point. So the Ribacoffs allegedly engaged in fraudulent billing practices when working with the Church of Scientology. And I don't know if this necessarily means that they were overcharging clients on behalf of the Church of Scientology, or if the IIG was overcharging the church itself. But if that's the case, and they were overcharging the Church of Scientology, that is fucking hilarious. Like the infamous space cult that screws over their follower base by making them pay millions of dollars to ascend to the highest level of respect. They were overcharged by the detectives that they hired. And honestly, that's kind of a W. Like, it's probably against the Better Business Bureau or whatever the fuck, but like, let them have it, okay?
Not a lot of people know this, but L. Ron Hubbard was a black man.
So it's been like 4 years since this lawsuit was filed, and surely there has to be some justice, right? Kinda. The IIG had to settle 2 multi-million-dollar lawsuits, mainly because Suzanne's sexual assault case and fraud allegations had to be filed under different statutes, so it resulted in 2 separate cases. One was settled after Dan sold his home to move from New York to Florida. The courts intervened in the monetary settlement of the estate and rewarded its payout to Suzanne. And as for Yanti, or Michael Cruz, he fled New York. Innocent men, they just act so weird, don't they? Now, if you go onto the official Steve Wilkos website, Dan is nowhere to be found. He was let go after the racist text messages were uncovered, because if there's one thing that Steve Wilkos isn't, it's a massive racist. Whew. That was a close one. Interestingly, though, the show and the team never addressed Dan's firing at all. They don't say anything about Dan on their website. They never made any comment about his racist remarks and memes, or even his lawsuit. They just kind of swept Dan under the rug and pretended he was never there. But here is the craziest thing about all of this. Even though Steve Wilkos fired Dan from staff, they still utilize the polygraph test. But who's the new tech? While this technician has never actually made an on-set appearance like Dan has, it's rumored that potentially Lisa took her father's place. So even though this private investigation company just settled out of court a sexual misconduct lawsuit, IIG and Lisa Ribacoff are still utilized by the Steve Wilkos show despite everything. And even though the racist text is what initially got Dan fired, it's not like Lisa is any better. Whenever Lisa is asked about her father's racist past or his racist comments, she refuses to answer.
Let me just step aside because I have to wrap this.
Oh, what about the racist text that's in the problem? You recall that?
I'm not my father. I can't comment.
I just want to know if you were involved.
This is a professional environment.
I understand.
I understand that. You're questioning me on the actions of someone else right now. This is
questions on you though, right here.
This is not the appropriate environment. If you have a question for me pertaining to this, you can speak to me on the side.
Additionally, a daily news article from New York cites potential racial biases from Lisa, who conducted lie detector tests for applicants at the NYPD. Apparently, it's actually still very common to be administered to a lie detector for a certain job, and this is the case if you're applying to be an NYPD police officer. Lisa apparently would fib the results of black applicants, and this is what allegedly happened with candidate Jonathan Carter. Along with the racially insensitive text messages, all of the controversies incentivized the New York Metropolitan Transit Authority Police Department to, at first, suspend the Ribacoff's contract to provide polygraph services. But then after the settlement of the Goldsmith case, their contract was terminated indefinitely. And yet, despite one of the largest police forces in the country wanting nothing to do with the IIG, Steve Wilkos still depends on their services to this day. He even still defends Dan Ribacoff and his work. And this might be because Steve Wilkos himself isn't really that great of a guy either. Shocker, I know.
This is your man.
Yes,
Look at the screen.
that's mine.
Aside from letting 2 child murderers off the hook and falsely accusing others of abuse based on polygraph tests that don't work, Wilkos has presented himself to be a massive fucking hypocrite. Now, I could sit here and I could talk about how much of a greedy, opportunistic, exploitive guy Wilkos is by airing out all of the dirty laundry of his guest, but I think y'all kind of picked up on that by now with the last few sections. I don't need to repeat myself. I think that was kind of a dead giveaway anyways, based on the fact that Steve runs a tabloid talk show.
If it's that where you would say that about somebody, that's a ratings booster, right? You know, and then listen, man, my show, like any show, if you're in it for the ratings, I don't care what anybody says. So.
Like, Steve is not inherently these things. It's just the nature of the programming he's in. Like, maybe off camera, he does genuinely care a little bit. What I more so want to talk about is whether or not Steve stands by his own programming. And what I mean by this is, does Steve Wilkos believe that everything is 100% real? Does he trust the polygraph test? And does he truly believe that the people he treats like guilty, evil people are actually guilty of what they did? So the short answer is no. The long answer is the only thing ruining the reputation and credibility of the Steve Wilkos show is Steve Wilkos. For example, did you know that Steve once said in an interview with Charlemagne the God that he would never take a polygraph test provided by his own show? Why is that, Steve? I mean, if you're using this thing to slander people's name and reputation on live television, wouldn't you want to know the accuracy of it yourself? Just for the sake of being confident that this machine isn't bullshitting you? Like, you're treating people on your show like the devil based off of a line chart you don't even trust yourself. The reason why Steve doesn't want to take his own polygraph test is because apparently, he also said that he once passed a lie detector test knowing full well he was lying. The story is that it's not like he passed a lie detector test for like shits and giggles when he was a police officer. Apparently, there was an incident, as Steve described it. He wasn't involved, but he was an eyewitness. So he went into work, and since this incident happened on work grounds, they had to open an investigation and question everyone. And that meant giving everyone a lie detector test. And instead of just being honest and telling these people the truth about what actually happened, he took a lie detector test and passed it, knowing he was lying.
Yeah, so I took a lie detector test and I beat it. I just kept my mouth shut.
Now look, Steve is like 60 or something, whatever, okay. Whenever this happened back in the day, he was just getting out of high school. So this young, dumb high schooler somehow was able to cheat a lie detector test. Like, it sounds like it is literally that fucking simple to do that a young dumb idiot can cheat this thing. Why do people still trust these fucking things still? And why does the show allow the usage of it even if the host knows that it's easy to cheat? I mean, this could potentially set up the show for a slander lawsuit, and there would be a pretty good case for it. But that doesn't change Steve's approach at all. Crazier even, in terms of the timeline of this specific interview, it was 9 months after the interview that Steve would film the episode with Anca Pennington, where the lie detector results said that she lied about burning her children when they were never burned at all. Interestingly, despite this test being provably wrong based on alternative medical results, Dan Ribacoff still stands by the test, even blocking Anca from his own Facebook page so that she couldn't debunk his claims about her again. He still believes that Anca failed that test and won't even let her rebuke his claims publicly. Steve even supports Dan's work by saying that his lie detectors are 99% accurate. So what, was Anca just conveniently the 1% that was bullshit? Also, what about Kandie? What about Jesse? Those two went to jail despite passing with flying colors. What the hell's up with that? And look, I know that a lot of people will say that Steve Wilkos sucks because he's abrasive, he's mean, he verbally attacks others on his show, which has then led to these crazy rumors about how he apparently has worked with psychics instead of a polygraph technician. He's also cheated on his wife, or his wife is abusive, or something, all of which is conspiracy theory garbage that I don't want to engage with because y'all are crazier and nuttier than he is, and that is saying a lot. What I do want to talk about is what has been confirmed, and what was confirmed is Steve Wilkos' irresponsible actions behind the wheel. So in 2018, Steve was arrested after rolling his car off the road near his home. He ended up turning himself into the police, who clocked his blood alcohol content at 3 times the legal limit. Initially, Steve told TMZ that he was in a car wreck due to being distracted while driving, but what actually ended up happening was due to a bout of depression. Steve drank himself to a 2.9 limit and slammed his car into 2 telephone poles and a tree. And because this man is an ex-cop, rich, white, and bald, all of the charges were wiped from his record after requesting alternative punishment. Because if any of his guests on his show ever tried to request that, they would be bitch slapped for the melanin. Look, I can't be too overly mad at a drunk driver. Alcoholism is a disease, it's an addiction, and it's a really, really bad addiction. Don't hate the addict, but hate the addictive substances that are allowed to be sold recreationally without much consequence. However, this crash and his reckless endangerment, that could have killed people. And I get that, like, this shit happened like what, 4 in the morning, so it's like, what people, bitch, where? But I just don't think that Steve should be bitching at people for not taking personal responsibility for their crimes that are objectively worse when he lied about something like this initially. Like, what? Anyways, I'm sure I'm just being a judgy little gnome who likes picking on past people's mistakes and judging them as if they are still responsible for them years later because I'm bitter and I like seeing people fail. Or maybe I have a good reason to be upset because 2 child murderers were just left off the hook because of Steve's false innocence. Like, dude, how do you let that happen? Look, Steve has made a lot of mistakes, but I think part of him has learned from at least some of them. The episodes with Kandie and Jesse are no longer up, and neither is Anca's. And getting rid of Dan was for the best because, like, but what continues to be an ongoing issue with Steve Wilkos and his show is that it's re-traumatizing people. And I don't know if Steve really recognizes that. So let me break it down. People who make comments about those who go on the Steve Wilkos show. I see this one a lot where people will say shit like, oh, well, these people knew what they were signing up for when they went on that show. And I would argue, no, That's fucking stupid. When you're about to open this traumatizing wound and share it to people, the last place you'd expect it to occur is with some media mogul in front of a live studio audience. And when you open up about this sort of stuff, you want to understand why. Why it had to be you. Why do you have to deal with this? Why is so-and-so who did this to you, why are they like this? And I just don't think you're gonna get that closure and get those answers on a show where people are chased off stage, yelled and screamed at, physically assaulted at times. And now, given all of this new information about how bullshit lie detectors are, they're potentially being slandered in front of millions of people. And this then pivots to my next question. For those who did have their name completely ruined on that show, why don't they sue? Why don't they present their evidence in a courtroom and not on live television? And it's because the show's producers are very selective on who they bring on to the Steve Wilkos show. Like I said, the audience of the Steve Wilkos show is populated by a lot of the disenfranchised, lower class people who opt out of monthly payments for those big TV providers and settle for like the 10-some channels on a satellite box. Those people can barely afford DirecTV, let alone a lawsuit. Everyone's appearance on the show and transport is covered by the show itself, because otherwise, these people could never afford the appearance, period. And if they can barely afford the appearance they're asking for, then they won't be able to sue. Plus, you know, the contracts and everything. It's like, yeah, sure, I guess you're technically right that these people do know what they're signing up for, but this shit is played off all the time as if it's real. Meaning, there are gonna be real-world consequences. Consequences that the show doesn't prepare anyone for. Because I don't even think that the show takes itself all that seriously in its convictions, to be completely honest with you. What this show is doing is not only re-traumatizing those who actually were negatively affected by abuse, but newly traumatizing those who were slandered. And when it's not either one of those two things, it's playing up serious crimes and accusations as entertainment. And not something you should, like, you know, seek therapy for. The show's implied logic here is essentially, well, we won't accommodate your therapy or your legal battles, but we can accommodate a spot on our show. And like, how the fuck does that really help anyone? And with further heightened awareness for mental health and the damages that poor mental health can do to people, this show doesn't do us any favors in 2024. So then, why does it keep getting renewed? Because Steve's methodology for this show is applicable far beyond just the show. The idea of yelling and screaming and attacking abusers is something that emboldens people. So watching it on the Steve Wilkos show, or Lyle Convoy screaming at abusive people, or Mama Max acting out killing abusive people, like, this shit runs so much deeper than you would think. And look, I'm all for emboldening and empowering people to shrink their abusers and not give them any power. But having your trauma capitalized on by network executives and greedy opportunists isn't justice. All it does is fuel this internalized heroes complex within Steve Wilkos. He's not screaming at an abuser because he cares for their victims. He's doing it because it makes him look like the good guy who is putting all these horrible people in their place. It's making him look superior because he's the guy that's gonna throw a chair at a pedophile. But this good guy persona is built on the backs of all of these people airing out their emotional destruction for millions of people watching. And I get that journalism and platforming people who want to have their pain heard is productive. I've done that for my channel. And it's helpful in trying to connect these people with a support group. But also, that support group needs to be built on the foundation of solidarity for victims, not create a hate mob. When the systems at play so heavily scrutinize victims in a court of law, the last thing that a victim wants to happen is to have their angry and explosive conduct on Steve Wilkos be reflective on who they are as a person, and whether that emotional response would warrant them justice at all. Because there's still this idea being perpetuated in our society of the perfect victim. And Steve is bringing out the worst in these victims to their detriment of having anyone take them seriously. Especially when you consider the potential interference by staff and directors to sway these people to act up for the camera. The stuff that Steve Wilkos covers on his show doesn't need to be dramatized. It doesn't need direction from coordinators of the show because this shit is depressing and raw as is. And with this preconceived notion that all tabloid TV is fake manufactured scripted garbage, then people aren't gonna hear these people out as victims if they aren't just actors for the show anyway. Basically what I'm trying to say is that if the show is real, then it's giving these victims a bad hand by exploiting their trauma and not assisting them afterwards. But if all of this is just fake manufactured garbage, the viewers will get the wrong impression of what being victimized really looks like. And I just don't think that's helpful for anyone.
I want to end this video by letting everyone know, for the final time, since I've said it in the beginning and somewhere in the middle, for legal reasons, everything we just discussed here is all alleged, based on publicly available information or my own personal opinion. I'm simply writing an opinion piece, not trying to fuck over the reputation of the Steve Wilkos show or anything. But also, I just want to say that if you still like watching the Steve Wilkos show, that's totally fine. This video is not some sort of hashtag cancel Steve Wilkos campaign. I'm not interested in Twitter marches and fake ass hashtags that don't do shit, cause that shit is so gay. Derogatory. But I'm not here to pull this show off air or anything. I just wanted to share my hyperfixations with all of you today. Because look, I'm not gonna lie, this stuff is really fucking interesting. I like Maury, I think that shit's fire and has some hilarious moments. But everyone's already fucking talked about Maury. I don't wanna be repeating the bandwagon, you know what I mean? And I don't even really care for Jerry Springer. That's beyond my time, right? That show is utter fucking nonsense, but Steve Wilkos has always had a fascinating little part in trash TV history that I feel like more people should talk about because it's fucking crazy and terrible. And if you find value in a show like this, I am not here to take that away from you. Like I said, there is a catharsis for watching abusive, shitty people get screamed and yelled at and told how much of a shitty person they are by this big, intimidating dude who looks like a balding snail. And I'm not gonna dismiss the effectiveness in intimidation strategies that Steve likely picked up on from this show and police work. I'm sure those are effective in some scenarios. I just think that this show has made one too many blunders that at this point, you kinda gotta know what you are, right? Steve wants to treat this show as a beacon of truth and real hard-hitting journalism, despite his first showbiz opportunity being on Jerry Springer, and it's very hard to come across as this avenger for people who are abused when you have entertainer written all across your big fucking bald forehead. But hey, what do I know? I'm just a lazy bedhead. And there's probably so much more I could say, but I feel like this is a good place to end things off. Hopefully y'all enjoyed this as much as I did. I know it's a bit of a directional whiplash for the channel, but I thought it would be a fun way to punch up at celebrities once again, so thank you for entertaining that. Shout out, of course, to my $5 patrons. If you support me on Patreon for $5 a month, you get a drawn thank you character called an EP to appear at the beginning and end of the video. So special thank you to Demibird Does, Jack the Bro, Alder Garaby, Fandom the Ho, Mellow Milo, John X Woodcat, Walls X Migraine, L Peace, Magnolia, Sky, the Ooh-Wooing One, Ethan, Bacon Pierogi, The Lorelock, Seraphim, Angel Intestines, Amber Lay, John Fannin, The Piper at Dawn, Jordan Ogle, Mamiko Megame, Noctisketch, Grimmy, Average Citrus User, Bob, Jellyfish Princess, Fun Stuffies, Trippy, Rudy Jazz, Johnny Boy, Rice Maddie, Pastel UFOs, and Gwendolyn Von Holt. Whew! Wow, that's a lot of you. Thank you. Seriously, that is so fucking generous of you. I'm really appreciative of every single one of you, but you know, I'm a greedy little fuck, so I definitely want more than that. So what do people do when they want more people to support them on Patreon? Oh, I know. They do a giveaway! are preparing for the spooky season, we're gonna be doing a live stream giveaway. So I was granted access to Five Nights at Freddy's Into the Pit from Megacat Studios, and they gave me 2 Steam keys to access the game. So we're gonna be doing a giveaway of those extra Steam keys. If you scroll down to the description below, there will be a Google form to enter into our contest. All you have to do is provide your YouTube username and a functional email, and you'll be added to a list to be randomly selected for the giveaway. I'll be streaming Five Nights at Freddy's Into the Pit on October 1st and announcing the 2 winners at the end of the stream. And if you want a chance to access these Steam keys to play Into the Pit for free, then you can enter to win in the description below. This is the first time I'm doing a giveaway, and it's no way in association with Megacat or YouTube. They just gave me free Steam keys, and the CEO gave me permission to give them away, so I thought that this would be a fun little opportunity for the fans. So sign up in the Google form below and join us on October 1st to watch the stream to see if you've won. Anyways, Instagram, Patreon, we have a shorts page on TikTok where I just upload my YouTube shorts up there. And that's it. Now get off my fucking stage.